If you don't like the law, change the law.
Mondays with Mike.
Mondays with Mike. Mondays with Mike.
Luigi Mangione. So, NBC reported back in late January that there was going to be no death penalty for Luigi Mangione, but that prosecutors can bring the evidence of the gun and journal found on his person, even though they didn't have a warrant, but the judge said, yeah, but it was a reasonable search. Now, there's an interesting character, Luigi Mangione. I'll start off by saying that we are anti-murder on this show. Don't kill anybody. Much better things you can do with your time. But we also believe in a functioning justice system. So my first question is, do you think that Luigi Mangione is going to get a fair trial, and do you think the judge was right to allow this evidence?
Yes, on both counts. So yes, he's getting a fair trial because already he's got a really expensive lawyer. It's not a public defender. He's got means and access to legal representation and skills that plenty of people don't. And the trial's been going on, not the trial, but the pre-motion stuff has been going on a while. And this was a victory for Mangione to not get the death penalty, to have it removed as a possibility for sentencing. And yes, I think the trial is fair enough. It's as fair as any other criminal defendant gets in the country, and there's going to be a jury of his peers if it moves to trial, which it's unless they settle, it looks like it's going to head to trial. But yeah, I see no reason, given what's happened, that it's going to be an unfair trial. With respect to the evidence being allowed, I personally think that in this scenario, it is acceptable because essentially it was called in, right? That someone dangerous was at the McDonald's. And so the cops do, in fact, have the ability. I'm not sure if they read him his rights when they started talking to him. I'm not clear on that, on what the timeline of events. But incidental searches are, in fact, allowed to determine if there's like a existing threat or an ongoing threat, right? So if this guy, if the extent of what they knew about him when they were talking to him was that he fit the description of somebody who had just committed a murder in broad daylight in New York City, the worry would be is if he has something like explosives or other kinds of weapons that pose a risk to the people at that McDonald's, for example. And so in that circumstance, I would wholly expect law enforcement to search everything on his person to make sure that nothing he has poses an existing or ongoing threat to others. Right? Where it gets tricky is if they went into like if he had any place he was renting or staying without a warrant. But this isn't that. This is a private business where he was a customer and they were called. It's not as if they weren't asked for help. It would be one thing if they just walked in, saw him, and then just took his stuff. It's a different thing if they were called for assistance by the business in this case, or I don't know if it was the business, but someone there called it in and said, hey, the guy who allegedly just murdered someone in the middle of New York City, I think it was in Manhattan, right? Like higher end part of New York City. I think he's here at this McDonald's, right?
Yeah.
And so then the cops show up. That's a little different because they were effectively invited in, right? And they were determining if the situation was safe. I'm not as aghast at the fact that they were doing their jobs there. It doesn't seem like that it's such a big deal. I agree with the judge's ruling on this one.
Yeah. He appears to be a murderer. You got to do something about it within the constraints of the law, of course. But come to think of it, if he's a murderer and he is an active shooter, you got to do what you got to do. But that's not what he was. Okay.
Yeah, but so they didn't know. That's the whole issue. Is that like, right. And it's the fact that unless they found the gun at the scene that was used in the murder, they didn't know if he still had the gun, and so that poses real like safety issues. And so while he's seated there, not actually armed or anything, that's the opportunity to figure it out. Also to figure out if there were any accomplices, if there was any kind of communication device, because one way you assess threat is you figure out if it's more than just him. But anyways,
that's fine. That's why they call it Mondays with Mike. So he appears to have done it, pending a trial, but we'll see. But Allegedly. It's all alleged. This is a podcast, not a news agency. But why do some people like him so much? Is this, like, Luigi, is this fixation on behalf of some, does this represent something rotten in society? Or could it be the product of a lot of frustration that somebody has had either with the systemic injustice in general of healthcare rationing, or perhaps even something more personal, whether it's oneself or one's loved ones being denied healthcare at a particular time? Do you think this fascination with him is coming from a good place?
No, I don't like the idea that vigilantism is viewed as acceptable, that the solution to what is essentially a political problem is to just attack a private citizen who just so happens to run one corporation that is of many corporations that are part of healthcare. Because remember, the healthcare system in the United States is like a fifth of the whole economy. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of workers. It's not just one guy. And there is no way to there's no way to justify what happened as making any kind of change at all. Because remember, corporations are unthinking, unfeeling things that make money. Who they have running that at any point in time doesn't make that much of a material difference. It's like a ship. You can have a captain of a ship telling a ship where to go, but the captain can be replaced if they have a heart attack or die or something, retire, right? You're not going to change the system by changing one cog of the machine. And so that's, I think, where there's a real problem in the reaction to supporting Mangione in any way, because it shows a real failure on the part of our education system to encourage people that if you want to make real effective social change, it has to be through like the democratic process. You have to elect people who agree with what you're saying. You make the argument. If the argument is accepted by enough people, those people get put into power, and then you get change. The issue with something like this with healthcare is that because it is a fifth of our economy, any kind of massive change on the scale required to change it would have potentially deleterious consequences, right? Huge unemployment, massive amounts of poverty and loss. And so you have to thread the careful needle there. And politics is the art of compromise. And what happened was an expression of an absolutism, right? Extreme absolutism, that something is perceived as wrong. And so the only way to remedy it is to destroy someone in participating in the wrongness. I don't like that idea at all, because Brian Thompson, for whatever it is that he did with United Healthcare, he was legally operating within the bounds of the law for how to make money with respect to the healthcare system. If you don't like the law, you change the law, not the people who are engaging in the legal effort to make as much money or profit as they could within what they were legally allowed to do. It would be one thing if they were like actively showing up and injecting people with cancer or some crazy thing like that. But what's happening is that there is, in fact, a free-ish market for health insurance. People decided to purchase that health insurance, and anybody could look up the statistics for rates of denial and go, oh, they denied a third of all claims. Maybe I should find a different insurer. Look, I understand why people might gravitate, just like they gravitate to someone like Robin Hood, or if you ever watch the movie V for Vendetta, Guy Fawkes or something like that. Like, I understand why people might gravitate to what seems like a simple solution to a very complex problem. And that the system as it's allowed right now legally is cruel, right? The fact that you spend huge sums of money paying premiums for insurance and then the insurer can just deny your claim. What is that? Why is that even allowed? Why is it not the case that they have to cover virtually all claims unless they can demonstrate there's actual criminal fraud or something like that? Like, why does the insurance company have any latitude of any kind in determining whether somebody's claim gets denied? They're not doctors. They're not the surgeons. They're not the medical professionals. Why do they have a say at all? That's what I don't understand. And that is a failure of our system, that it's illegally allowed that health insurers can deny claims at all. And the fact that United Healthcare devised a system where they deny so many claims, that's cruel, right? If somebody needs cancer treatment or they need some kind of immediate surgery and it gets denied and they don't get it and then they die, that sucks. And I understand that the battles people fight are very individual and personal for health insurance. because they can feel like they're cast adrift in a giant ocean of sadness. Because when someone applies for a claim for insurance and gets denied, in order to even have a chance at getting that claim approved, they have to appeal that decision to the same entity that just denied them that claim. And there's no guarantee that they'll still get the claim on appeal. And so people can feel like they have no recourse, that they've spent all this money on a product that they thought when they needed it would happen. And then, at least it seems for the numbers I was looking at, a third of them, they don't get it. Right. And so if you're sick or you have a chronic illness or you need like medicine or something, and your options given to you by society are, it's like Kamala Harris said, you either have to become extremely poor, you have to sell everything you own pretty much to get onto Medicaid, or you have to deal with what is there in terms of the options we have available for getting medical care. And the options suck, right? What are your options? You risk it all, go to a hospital and see if they'll treat you without insurance. They say no. Okay, that sucks. Or you go there and you say, I'll pay the full amount on my own. And they go, okay, here's the full amount. Like, wildly expensive because the prices are so inflated because they negotiate it with health insurance. What health insurance does is they negotiate down the existing price. But what the medical providers and hospitals do is that they have the prices so high as a negotiating position with the insurer to drive the price down so that they can come to an amount they agree with. So it's not 100,000 for the procedure. It's whatever the insurance negotiates down that they say they'll pay, and the hospital says okay, and then they pay that. But if you're not covered by insurance, you just get whatever they tell you it's going to cost. So if you need $1 million for cancer treatment, good luck. You either have $1 million, you don't get the treatment, or you say you'll pay, don't pay, declare bankruptcy, you lose all your money. That's the kind of situation we have right now, that people are left in these very difficult, seemingly impossible situations, and they don't view any like viable path out. And you saw that right now with the healthcare debate with the Obamacare premiums, where it looked like there was an opportunity for Congress to do the right thing and just extend those tax credits so that the insurance prices wouldn't spiral out of control, 1,000 a month, 2,000 a month, 3,000 a month, double. And what does Congress do? They go, oh, no, not going to do it. And then they don't. So the situation we have now in terms of the actual experience for people trying to seek healthcare in the United States is extremely stratified. If you're very poor, you have access to Medicaid. If you're very old, you have access to Medicare. If you're in the military, you have access to TRICARE. If you're in government, you have access to whatever the government programs are. But it's stratified in the sense that some groups have very limited access to health insurance or healthcare. And of that access, it's exorbitantly expensive, right? It's like 1,000 a month or 2,000 a month for premium. That's way out of reach for almost anyone unless you're very rich. And so I understand that appeal. The problem is that the solution that Mangione engaged in is not the solution. It's not acceptable. It should never be morally acceptable in a civilized society that the answer to problems is to engage in violence, because that's not an effective tactic. It's not durable, right? You run out of people. The French Revolution saw that. You run out of people to execute, and then you're just left with whoever's left yelling at each other angrily without actually coming up with a meaningful, durable, lasting resolution to this problem. And is that a failure of our current system, that so much power is invested in the hands of so few that the corporations have managed to create a way where the middleman of the healthcare makes exorbitant amounts of money off of human suffering? Yeah, it sucks, right? That because of Citizens United, they were able to lobby with a huge, exorbitant amount of money, just mind-boggling amounts of money, to ensure that the representatives don't actually, when asked to, meaningfully improve the lives of people for access to healthcare. That we're left with the system we have because the system we have profits these companies so much. It's not as if they don't make money. They're some of the most profitable companies in the whole country, if not the world. They make a lot of money. Look at the list of the Forbes 500 or whatever the top 500 is of the corporations of the country. I think it was in the top 10, like 4 of them were either pharmaceuticals or at one point. I'm not sure if that's still the case, but there was a point where like the most profitable companies, period, were either pharmaceutical companies or health insurers. A system that is so profitable for so many people obviously is going to be vested in trying to squeeze as much profit as it humanly can out of people. And United Healthcare figured out a strategy to do that by denying people claims. That's their right to do as a corporation, as a private for-profit corporation, right? Where I think that the anger arises is that there's no meaningful competition in some places to having access to insurance. That your options are either you pay United Healthcare for your insurance, especially if it's an employer that provides the insurance for employees. The employer decides the insurance, not the employees. The employer decides who to work with. That it creates a situation such that some people don't really have a choice if they want to continue being employed in a place for their job of which insurer they get. And because one of the insurers is so egregious in how many claims it denies, that's where you get this situation where people can feel helpless. But going after the CEO doesn't change that. The
Right.
only thing that could change that kind of action, there's two options actually. Universal healthcare. Everybody gets access to healthcare, period. No insurance. If you need help, you go through the government would be the insurer essentially. And that can take two forms. You have a public option that competes with the private insurers. So you have access to health insurance in every state in the country, no matter what. That is a direct competitor to all of these smaller insurance companies because a lot of insurance companies, they operate on like a state by state basis. It's a whole thing. You could have that, right? And that would meaningfully change the outcome for people because they have an option that isn't one that denies claims all the time. Or
Mhm.
the other option is regulation on these insurers that they can't deny claims except in the most extreme circumstances, that they have to like literally prove fraud or on the part of either the doctors or the patients in order to deny the claim, that virtually all claims would have to be covered, period, and figure it out that from then on. Because the issue we have is that if right now the situation provides way too much power in the hands of these insurance companies to decide matters of literal life and death, right? Whether you get cancer treatment or you don't, whether you get a transplant for a kidney or a lung or a heart or whatever, or you don't, right? That's where you get those horror stories of people who are denied their treatment at like the last second or even mid surgery. Like, why do these insurance companies have the ability to deny somebody getting medical care in the middle of their procedure? What is that? But the only solution to that is government regulation, or it's creating a competitor that's nonprofit that doesn't look to make profits, that is just a like a nonprofit insurance company that is designed explicitly to cover people's claims, whatever they are. And there are
Mhm.
examples of that. So the one I think of is the children's, what is it called? The one that always has those commercials. Ronald
Cars
Mc,
for kids.
no, the Ronald McDonald House is the one where they pay for
Oh.
the families while kids are getting treated. But then there's the other one where they pay for the full St. Jude's. There you go. That's an example of something where one segment of the population, in this case kids, all of their medical costs covered, period. There is no insurance involvement. It's if you qualify for this thing, whatever the bar is, whatever the limit is, you get access 100%, right? That is a alternative philanthropy, but it shouldn't be the alternative, right? This is something that is most effective when you have the most leverage, and the most leverage exists for the government because that's the one that can tell a hospital or doctors or anyone, you will no longer be able to operate in the country to make money unless you abide by whatever our requirements are. It's take it or leave it. And that's what other countries have figured out and are more effective at health outcomes because the United States has like the highest rate of bankruptcy for medical bills of any country. That's crazy. People spend literally all their money just for healthcare. Other countries don't. So people can see that they're getting a much less affordable product with similar or lower outcomes. People feel like they're getting ripped off. Same for medicine, same for pharmaceuticals. But what was I going to say? He represents, how do I explain this? It's too simple of a solution, right? That if you just make these people scared, they'll stop doing it. Of the health insurance companies, that having vigilantism will just somehow rein in these worst practices. Look, there's a point where corporations could be run by robots and still make money in the way that they're making, such that there's nobody that could be scared. That's why you need to have democratic change to fix these problems, is because it is systemic, right? It is the whole system is flawed in certain ways, and that the way to fix it is the democratic process. is to have like a universal healthcare system or something similar. And so that's what the issue I have is with people supporting Mangione is that it's immoral, obviously, to execute people in the street. It's unethical, but it's also wrong. It's not the actual like logical way to address the problem. It just people can feel good like they're getting revenge or something, but revenge isn't the answer. Revenge is murder, and murder is not acceptable. It shouldn't be ever. It should never be the case that people feel that they're backed into a corner, that murder is their only option out of it. No way. There has to be a better way. That's the whole point of civilization is that we've evolved away from duels and executing people in the street. It's the same argument against the death penalty that there's got to be a better way to one, punish people, but to two, there's got to be a better way to improve society. In this case, it's the democratic process or it's nonviolent protest. You don't like something, you protest it nonviolently. You have a sign or you show up and you say, I don't like this, fix it. Will it take a long time? Absolutely. Change takes time, but it's a more durable change, right? That's the big thing is it's much more durable and it's a lot less risk because engaging in crime carries with it the risk of getting imprisoned or shot, right? Because look, even though the death penalty is off the table, he's still looking at probably life in prison or close to it, maybe a little less than that, 20 or 30 years. That's still a really long time to send a message. And the message wasn't even really sent. Like we didn't see any significant change in the elections.
Right. Yeah, it's just a big waste. So, did you hear where Trump talked about the discombobulator?
Yeah, I did. Yep. Yeah.
Does this bring up memories of our previous discussion where maybe there's a weapon that they don't talk about until it's used?
Yeah, absolutely. That the very best weapon of any military arsenal is one where nobody knows it exists until it's used. And then it diminishes in value, but it's still valuable. Because it's the element of surprise that the most effective tactic for any military operation is for your opponents not to actually know what you can do. Because if they don't know what you can do, they have no way to really prepare or defend against it. Because defenses are usually created after the fact.
Okay, do we know what this discombobulator did?
I have no idea. It sounded like a EMP or something, which is an existing technology of shutting down the radar and the tracking, but I'm not entirely certain what it does because it wasn't clear from the description of what precisely it was doing, other than that it was effective at what it was doing. But I have no idea.
Do you suspect we have more such weapons of different types, perhaps?
Sure. The weapon I think of whenever I think of innovation is the snow bullet gun. Is that there was a gun that was created to make bullets out of snow, which would be undetectable when somebody gets shot by them because the bullet would melt, right? So it's a gun that shoots essentially ice bullets, something like that, right? But if there is something like that, it's going to be something to do with like magnetism, like stopping a rocket mid-flight, because surprise, the Earth's a giant magnet, right, in terms of our atmosphere. And so one way to stop things from moving is to essentially create a bigger magnet. It would be something like that. Or because we can measure gravitational waves, anybody who figures out something to do with gravity, like reversing its polarity, the strength of gravity or something, you could effectively render vehicles useless if you figure out a way to suspend them in air with gravity. But again, these are the kinds of things that are so on like the outer edge of what technology can do that we won't know they exist until they're used because they're super duper secret. But something I wrote down for the notes for this particular question was that because there were all these hearings about the UAP, the unidentified aerial phenomena, the UFOs or whatever, the aliens, that if there are technologies that surpass human technology right now, if they're moving faster than humans or moving in such a way we can't detect them, then there's an awful lot that could be gleaned from those technologies if they do exist that we don't know the government actually knows to do or use. We won't know.
Exactly, we won't know. So much more about that would be by nature speculative, so we couldn't.
I think it's a good thing that like the general public doesn't know because there's always a risk for anybody just knowing things because this is designed for defense. The one downside is that other countries probably also have technologies that we don't fully understand. So the one I'm thinking of was the one in Cuba that like sound thing that was giving people headaches or something. That thing.
Havana syndrome, yeah.
Yeah, that thing. That if there's a weapon like that which exists that we don't have an effective countermeasure to, then what could happen in a future war is that you have two weapons deployed at the same time that neither side has a way of preparing for, and both sides get destroyed or harmed in some serious way without any real way to remedy it. That's the scary part of actually the AI, the push for AI, is that because AI can innovate, not necessarily innovate, but because AI can process information so quickly, it creates the potential for like wildly crazy inventions to be created that we just aren't prepared for as human beings. Things that, especially, I'm thinking of things like nanotechnology, like tiny little, like mosquito sized thing, or even smaller, but tiny little robots that could infiltrate the circulatory system, that could gum up the works, that could stop people in place, right? If you have 1,000 little robots that all are pulling down, individually they may not be strong, but combined, the force would keep people stuck in place. We have drone technologies, right? If you've ever seen those drone displays of the fireworks shows or the big events where they had these like really intricate drone art. So we know that things can fly in a coordinated fashion like that. It's just making it much smaller. Because imagine if there was a way to stop a gun from shooting by gumming up the works inside the gun, right? If they flew up into the barrel of the gun and stopped the triggering mechanism, for instance, from going, the fear is completely removed of being shot by a gun if you can't fire the gun, right? No human involvement necessary.
The anti-gun ray gun or whatever it is.
That's one of those things again where if they have the technology, they're never going to use it except in like an actual war.
That's why they call it Mondays
with Mike.
with Mike.